Welcome to the Shadows of Fear channel. Now I will guide you through a world of darkness, witches, and unknown creatures. I hope this helps you disconnect from your daily routine and relax. To avoid any visual distractions, we will leave the screen black and let your imagination run wild. Before we begin, write in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is in your country. Now, let's begin. I never liked sailing out at night, but that time I had no choice. The freighter Mar Eterno had to leave the port of Vigo, bound for Newfoundland, and the orders were clear. The tide favored us and delay was not permitted. I remember the harbor lights receding, flickering like tired fireflies, while the engine roared beneath my feet, and the sea seemed like a dark beast swallowing us without mercy. There were 15 of us on board, weathered by salt and cold, though that dawn we all kept quieter than usual, as if silence were a secret language shared by the sea and those who dared it. The first hours passed peacefully, but as the coastline vanished and the ocean unfolded into infinity, the calm turned unsettling. The sky was clear, yes, but there was something strange about the wind. It didn't push with the usual force of the Atlantic. It was like an intermittent, irregular sigh that made my skin crawl. On deck, the old bosun, Diego, chewed tobacco with his eyes fixed on the horizon. I asked him what was wrong, and he only spat on the deck and muttered, "The sea falls silent when it wants to swallow something." Days went by and routine began to crack. The watch shifts grew heavier. The sailors slept little and badly, and the nights were torture. There was a kind of whisper coming from the hull, as if something were scraping the metal from the water. At first, I thought of fish or the waves themselves, but then we all heard it. Rhythmic taps, soft, insistent, like someone swimming alongside the ship and knocking with their knuckles to get our attention. One night I went out on deck to smoke, and I saw it. I swear it. A figure slid along the side, right at sea level, pressed against the hull. It made no sense. We were in the middle of the ocean, hundreds of miles from land, and yet it was there. I can't fully describe it, because the darkness cloaked it, like a shroud. But I do remember the eyes. They shone with a sickly green glow, 2 lanterns, staring at me without blinking, while a pale hand rested on the steel of the hull. I screamed, and when the others came running, there was nothing. The men began to murmur that it was an omen, that someone had brought bad luck, that the Mar Eterno was marked. Diego didn't speak, but I sensed he knew more than he said. In a low voice, he told me that this ship wasn't new. It had had other owners, other names, and in every record, the same thing was noted. Crewmen vanished in the middle of the ocean. "A cursed ship can't be fixed with a fresh coat of paint," he said, and I froze. The first disappearance happened on the 5th day. It was Ernesto, the cook. No one saw him fall. No one heard a splash. He simply wasn't in his bunk, nor in the galley, nor in any corner. We searched until we were frantic. But the sea is a bottomless pit, and Ernesto became another name swallowed by the vastness. We tried to convince ourselves it was an accident, that he'd slipped and fallen, but deep down we knew better. Then it was Julian, the youngest. He was barely 20, always laughing, and one night he vanished just like Ernesto. No trace, only his jacket caught on a railing was left behind, as if someone had ripped it off while taking him. From then on, no one slept. We took turns watching the cabins, but the disappearances continued, one after another, until of the 15, there were only 8 left, then 6, then 4, and then what no one wanted to admit happened. During my watch, I saw him come out of the water. He was tall, thin, his skin so white it seemed to glow in the dark. Water streamed from his body as if he himself were an extension of the sea. His eyes were the same I had seen that night, green, piercing, cold. He walked across the deck without leaving a footprint, and one of the men, the Galician Simon tried to confront him with a knife. He lasted not even a second. A hand touched him and Simon collapsed, as if his soul had been ripped out whole. The rest of us fled, screaming, praying. His skin so white it seemed to glow in the dark. Water streamed from his body, as if he himself were an extension of the sea. His eyes were the same I had seen that night. Green, piercing, cold. He walked across the deck without leaving a footprint. Barricading ourselves in the engine room, while that being continued his slow stroll, as if searching for something, or someone. It was then I understood he didn't want the ship. He wanted us. One by one. One by one until all the 15, there were only 8 left. Then 6, then 4. And then what no one wanted to admit happened. During my watch, I saw him come out of the water. He was tall, thin, green, piercing, cold. He walked across the deck without leaving a footprint. Three of us remained. Diego, myself, and another sailor who could barely speak for fear. We spent 2 nights without closing our eyes, hearing footsteps on deck, hearing the water strike the hull with unnatural force, and how a murmur, like a distant song, filtered through every crack of the ship. It was a hypnotic chant, a lullaby that seemed to promise rest while at the same time dragging you toward the edge of madness. The last night I remember seeing Diego seated, his gaze lost, whispering that he was tired. Before I could stop him, he went out on deck, and I heard him laugh, a brief laugh, before the silence devoured him. He never returned. When I realized it, I was alone. I don't remember how the hours passed. The ship kept moving, yes, but it felt as if no one was steering it. The other sailor disappeared without a sound, and I was left there, certain I would be next. I saw the figure rise again from the water, crawling toward me with outstretched arms, but at that exact moment, a light appeared on the horizon. A ship, a damned ship coming toward us. They found me unconscious on deck, delirious, the entire crew gone. No one believed me when I told them what I had seen. They said it was fear, that the men had fallen from storms or carelessness, that I had gone mad. But I know what I saw, what I heard, what brushed my skin with a freezing hand. And though I am on dry land today, every night when I close my eyes I hear that whisper beneath my bed, the same tapping on the hull, like knuckles knocking, as if the sea reminds me it does not forget me, that sooner or later the Mar Eterno will come to fetch me. If you're enjoying these dark tales and want more, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to Shadows of Fear, and share your thoughts in the comments. Every bit of support helps us keep exploring the unknown together. Come, be part of this community, and don't miss a single story. Now, let's continue. I never imagined I would agree to that job, and yet I did, because I was broke and had no choice. A fishing freighter named San Telmo was looking for men, offering a quick passage along the rugged Cantabrian coast. The captain promised it would last no more than 3 nights at sea, just a routine inspection of a few research buoys. Nothing dangerous, nothing extraordinary. Or so he said. What he kept to himself was that our route would lead us straight past the abandoned lighthouse at Estaca de Bears, a place sailors mentioned in whispers as though it were the very doorway to hell. On the first night, the sea was calm, unnaturally calm. The waves rolled without force, the wind barely stirred the rigging, and above us the sky was perfectly clear, with a pale moon hanging over the ocean like a fresh scar. Even so, the atmosphere on board was heavy. The crew avoided conversation as if words themselves might awaken something lurking in the dark. The only noises were the groan of the timbers and the steady pulse of the engines. I didn't understand the tension until I noticed the boatswain, usually a fearless man, crossing himself as the outline of the lighthouse rose against the horizon. It cast no light. The tower stood black and silent, and yet it ruled the distance, like the corpse of a sentinel, refusing to fall. On the second night, the captain made a choice that unsettled us all. He pushed us closer to the coast, far too close in my opinion. Those waters were treacherous, the currents dragged like claws, and the rocks beneath waited like knives for the slightest mistake. I was standing on deck when I saw it, a sudden glimmer from the lighthouse tower. It was not the sweeping glow of a beacon, but a brief, sharp flash, the kind you'd get from a lantern flicking on and off. I told myself it was a trick of the eye, until another sailor pointed at it with a shaking hand. Then the others saw it too, a shadow pacing the balcony, a human figure moving steadily, as though it had been watching us the entire time. That night, none of us slept. A sound rose from the sea, low, resonant, impossible to place. It was as if dozens of voices sang in unison, a chant both guttural and unearthly. I pressed my hands to my ears, but it slicked inside my skull, worming its way through my thoughts, whispering things I didn't want to hear. Men left their bunks as though hypnotized, eyes rolled back, bodies swaying like puppets, walking straight for the deck. They would have flung themselves into the ocean if we hadn't struck them down, dragging them back by force. At sunrise, one man was gone, Mateo, an old veteran who had given his life to the sea for 3 decades. His berth was empty. No one had heard a sound. No one had seen him leave. All that remained was his cap, dripping salt water on the floorboards. Stranger still, the soles of his boots were coated with fine beach sand, the same pale grains found only on the shore below the lighthouse cliffs. The third night descended like a curse. The captain, his face drawn with fear, ordered a retreat, but we were already trapped. A wall of fog rolled in without warning, swallowing ship and sea alike. Radar screens blinked uselessly, the compass spun like a toy, and the engines roared against an unseen weight. The fog reeked of rust and rot, a metallic stench like earth freshly dug from graves. Out of that suffocating whiteness, the lighthouse materialized. It wasn't a trick of the eyes. The tower stood just off our bow, impossibly close, though we knew we had been sailing away from it. And then it shone. The lantern roared to life with a blinding beam, sweeping across the deck in waves of ghostly white. When my vision cleared, I realized we were no longer alone. Shapes stood among us, men who were not part of our crew. They dripped with seawater, their skin the color of ash, their eyes empty sockets. They moved calmly, naturally, as if they had always belonged to the ship. One of them stared at me, and I knew the face. It was Mateo. His lips parted, and a stream of salt water poured from his mouth as he whispered the same cursed hymn we had heard the nights before. Terror consumed us. Some men dropped to their knees in prayer, others swung knives and axes, but their blows cut through nothing, like slashing at smoke. Yet the dead were not powerless. One brushed against a sailor's arm, and I watched in horror as the man's skin drained of color, shriveled, and collapsed into a dry husk in seconds. I fled toward the wheelhouse, heart hammering, while the lighthouse beams spun faster and faster, its strobing flashes burrowing into my mind. With each sweep I saw visions, oceans filled with floating corpses, the tower alive with crawling shadows, and a black abyss yawning beneath our keel. The light was showing me futures, and every one was worse than death. The captain's shouts carried no weight. The crew was unraveling into madness. Some hurled themselves overboard, convinced the sea would cradle them in mercy. But their screams stretched on, too long, as though they were falling into bottomless nothing. Others wandered into the fog, following the chant toward an unseen shore that did not exist. By the time the fog thinned, I was alone. The San Telmo drifted, abandoned, and the lighthouse was distant once more, dark, mute, as if the nightmare had dissolved with the mist. But I knew better. The empty deck still bore the sodden clothes of men who would never return. Somehow, God knows how, I brought the vessel back to port. No one believed a word I said. The official report claimed a storm had swallowed the others. But I know the truth. I know what my eyes saw, what my ears endured, what touched my flesh in the dark. The lighthouse still stands. At night you won't see it, but sometimes, if your ship strays too close, the fog will rise and the light will turn again. And once it does, there is no coming back. If you're enjoying these dark tales and want more, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to Shadows of Fear, and share your thoughts in the comments. Every bit of support helps us keep exploring the unknown together. Come, be part of this community, and don't miss a single story. Now, let's continue. The sea changes its face depending on the vessel that dares to cross it. A rusty freighter is one thing, a private yacht is another. And the one I boarded, the Lady of Ice, was a millionaire's whim. A 90-foot beauty, polished wood gleaming, sails spotless, and a name that carried its own chill. I was hired as an extra hand for what sounded like the easiest of trips. A wealthy couple, their 2 teenage children, and a captain who boasted he knew every hidden corner of the Mediterranean. It seemed simple, almost a gift. Yet from the very first nightfall, I sensed that something was profoundly wrong. The wind carried us gently, the full moon laying a silver path over the water. Still, what I noticed most was the cold. It was summer, and yet the air on deck pierced my bones like winter steel. The family laughed, toasted wine in crystal glasses, and I forced myself to play along. But whenever I went below, into the cabins, a stench clung to the air, a sickly sweet odor, laced with salt and mildew, seeping out of the very walls of the yacht. On the second night, while I was keeping watch at the helm, I heard footsteps across the deck. I thought one of the children had slipped out of bed, but when I turned, I saw her, a woman in white, standing at the bow. Her dark hair streamed behind her, as though caught by a wind that touched no one else. And her hands drifted along the rail with the tenderness of someone caressing a lover. I leapt to my feet and hurried toward her, but when I came within 10 feet, the figure dissolved into mist and vanished. I told no one. Who would have believed me? Yet the next morning, the elder son woke shaken, claiming nightmares of a blue-skinned woman calling to him from the sea. His sister confessed the same dream. The parents laughed it off, but the captain's eyes hardened. And in that silence, I realized he knew. He knew the Lady of Ice carried secrets. On the third day, the auxiliary engine died without reason. No damage, no spilled fuel, no explanation. It simply stopped. Nervously, the captain ordered the sails raised, trusting the wind instead. I went down to inspect the machinery and froze at what I found. The entire casing of the engine was glazed with frost. Frost, here, in warm summer waters, as though we had slipped into the Arctic. I touched it and jerked back. The cold bit into my skin like fire. That night, the sea rose. Not in a storm, not with wind, but with a deep, uneven swell that made the hull groan like a wounded beast. On deck, the parents had grown frantic. They swore they heard a woman laughing whenever they approached the bow, and I heard it too. Soft, mocking laughter, drifting like broken bells through the night air. The children wept. The captain clutched a bottle of rum, muttering between gulps that we must ignore her, that only by denying her would she fade. But she did not fade. She grew stronger. I saw her again that night, this time so close I could see her eyes. Two pits of darkness, glossy and wet, reflecting the moon like drowned mirrors. She spoke without opening her lips, or maybe she placed the words directly into my skull. A voice like a distant hymn, echoing inside me. Give back what is mine. By the fourth night, the captain had lost all control. He shouted into the wind, raging that she would never had it, never take what was his. He staggered into the cabin, returned with a pistol, and when the figure appeared at the bow once more, he fired. The muzzle flash lit the deck for a heartbeat, but the bullet passed through empty air. Then his body arched violently, as though gripped from within, and he shrieked, a scream that will haunt me until death, as he toppled into the sea. He never surfaced. Panic consumed us. The mother clutched her children. The father begged me to steer for shore, but the yacht itself refused to obey. The wheel turned on its own, the sails drew taut with a phantom gale, and the vessel carried us farther and farther out, deeper into open water. I tried to steady myself, but the temperature plunged until my breath came in clouds. The yacht's name, Lady of Ice, was no longer a metaphor. It had become a fact. And then I understood. This was not a ship cursed by chance. It belonged to her. She was its mistress, and she was reclaiming what was hers. I saw her pacing across the deck, her white dress clinging to her body, seawater dripping from every fold. She sang in a voice cracked and broken, yet mesmerizing. The family wept. I prayed, but she came closer, slow, relentless, inevitable. I cannot recall how it ended. My memory is a series of fragments, jagged and raw, pale hands dragging the children into the dark, the father's skull splitting against the rail, the mother clinging desperately to someone who was no longer her daughter, and me, clutching a rope, throat torn from screaming, while the lady smiled, her gaze cutting through me like knives. I awoke adrift in a lifeboat, alone, sunburnt and half dead. Days later, a patrol found me. Of the yacht, the family, the captain, there was no trace. They told me we must have wrecked in a storm, that I was lucky to survive. But I know the truth. The Lady of Ice is still out there, sailing her endless course with the ghostly woman at the helm, seeking new souls to claim. Now, whenever I pass a marina and see a white yacht gleaming in the sun, a shiver runs through me. I dread the day I recognize the name painted across its stern, Lady of Ice. And I know when that day comes, she will return for me. If you're enjoying these dark tales and want more, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to Shadows of Fear, and share your thoughts in the comments. Every bit of support helps us keep exploring the unknown together. Come, be part of this community, and don't miss a single story. Now, let's continue. They always told me that the worst thing about a submarine is not the pressure of the deep or the endless dark, but the silence. The absolute silence that surrounds you when the engines are cut and the ocean swallows you whole, like a floating tomb. I never believed it until I joined the crew of the Argos, an aging scientific sub refitted for research missions. There were 20 of us, men and women, packed into a steel shell, ready to descend over 4,000 meters into the black waters off the Azores. The first day was routine enough: sonar readings, hull checks, oxygen calibrations. We moved through the protocols with practiced efficiency, the hum of machinery reassuring in its constancy. But by the time the second night arrived, if night even has meaning in a place where darkness never lifts, the atmosphere had shifted. The sonar began returning anomalies. Echoes that didn't match rock formations, or schools of fish, or any current we knew. The Cygnes drifted around us at a crawl, circling, as though something massive was out there, choosing to remain unseen. The tension tightened in every compartment. In their bunks, some swore they heard tapping along the hull, as though colossal fingers were brushing the steel. Others whispered of voices, murmurs, drifting through the ventilation shafts. At first, I dismissed it as fatigue, the trick of minds trapped too long beneath the sea. But then, during my watch, I heard it myself. My name, clear, deliberate, spoken from the other side of the hatch, as though someone were waiting just beyond the steel, calling me to open. Captain Sands, a hard man, weathered by decades of command, dismissed the stories as nonsense. He barked for discipline, for silence, for focus. Yet his eyes betrayed him. Even he couldn't hide the flicker of dread there. The crew began to unravel. Lucia, one of our engineers, locked herself in the lavatory, sobbing that she had seen a face pressed against the glass of the periscope. When we pulled her out, she shook like a leaf, swearing it had been her mother's face, her dead mother, smiling from the abyss. On the third night, we descended deeper, chasing data we no longer cared about. That was when the impossible occurred. Every light flickered at once. The engine stuttered into silence, and the void around us grew absolute. In that instant we heard it, a groan, a drawn-out metallic lament, the hull itself crying beneath an invisible grip. It was the sound of something squeezing us, testing the strength of our coffin. We held our breath, waiting for implosion. But then, as suddenly as it began, the engine roared back to life, the lights steadied, and the moment passed. No one spoke, yet every face carried the same thought. Something had reached out, just to see if we would break. As hours bled into one another, paranoia spread like infection. Crew reported shadows sliding down corridors, shapes retreating just beyond their vision. I myself saw a door slam with brutal force, though no one stood near. Sands tried to bury us in procedures, in routine, but nothing could mask the suffocating awareness that we were being watched, followed, measured. Disaster struck on the fourth day. Crawling at minimum speed, we picked up a contact on radar. Something enormous, the size of a freighter, trailing just astern. But no vessel had been logged in the region. No expedition filed, no shipping lanes anywhere near us. Sands ordered evasive maneuvers, but the contact shadowed us perfectly, mirroring every turn, every dive, every feint. For hours the thing stalked us, until suddenly it vanished from the screen. Relief barely touched us when the pounding began. It came from the hull, not soft brushing this time, but hammer blows, brutal, deliberate, rattling the plates. The lights failed, plunging us into half-darkness, and that was when I saw it. Through the observation dome loomed an eye, a single eye, vast as the hatch itself, staring in at us. Its vertical pupil contracted, fixing us in its gaze, unblinking, merciless. Some fell to their knees in prayer, others screamed. I could only freeze as the weight of that gaze crushed every shred of will. And then, as quickly as it had come, it vanished. Dawn, 2 crew were gone. Their bunks lay empty, bedding undisturbed. No sign of struggle, no trace at all. It was as though the sea had reached inside and plucked them away. Signs, ragged with desperation, gave the order to ascend. But ascent brought no relief. The higher we tried to climb, the heavier the sub felt. as if something below had snared us, dragging us back into the pit. The engines roared, but the depth gauge crawled upward at a snail's pace. Then the sound began. It was not a song, and yet it was. A resonance, low and inhuman, vibrating through every beam and rib, slipping straight into our bones. There were no words, yet meaning saturated the tones. Surrender, open, let the sea in. Lucia rose as if entranced, face serene, and walked toward the main hatch. We barely tackled her in time. She fought like a woman possessed, shrieking that her mother was waiting just outside, waiting with open arms. I have never struggled so fiercely, nor feared so much. Signs attempted a distress call. The radio spat nothing but static, a harsh snow of sound that soon began to shift. Out of the noise grew voices, familiar voices. They called our names, one by one, pleading, cajoling. Mothers, fathers, lovers, children long dead. Some of us wept, some clawed at our ears. And then I heard him, my son, who had died years before, calling from the void, his small voice crying that he was cold. My hand found the hatch wheel before I even realized it. I was ready to open, to let him in. I don't know how we survived the final hours. Memories blur into fragments, alarms shrieking, lights bursting into sparks, seawater leaking through seams that should have been solid. Signs gripping the helm, face twisted, bellowing that if we were to die, then it would be on the surface, not in the pit. A thunderclap followed, not like any storm, but like 1,000 whales screaming at once. After that, blackness. I awoke in a hospital bed. Sunlight in the window, land beneath me. Only 5 of us remained alive. The Argos had surfaced in the middle of the ocean, engines dead, drifting aimless. Weeks later, a research vessel found us and hauled us aboard. Of the missing 15, not a trace remained. No one believes us. The reports call it stress, oxygen deprivation, hallucinations bred of the abyss. But I know what I saw. That eye, vast and merciless. That song, still echoing in my dreams. That weight, trying to pull us down into eternal night. The Argos was sealed away, abandoned in a naval yard, its hatches welded shut. And I pray with every breath, that no one ever opens them again. Because if they do, I fear it will not be the sea that rushes in, but something far, far worse. If you're enjoying these dark tales and want more, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to Shadows of Fear, and share your thoughts in the comments. Every bit of support helps us keep exploring the unknown together. Come, be part of this community, and don't miss a single story. Now, let's continue. The Imperial Dawn was a leviathan of steel and glass, a floating palace whose cabins outshone 5-star hotels. When I was hired onto the maintenance staff, I thought it was the chance of my life. The maiden voyage across the Atlantic, surrounded by millionaires, politicians, movie stars, and an atmosphere heavy with champagne and money. Nothing could possibly go wrong on a spectacle so carefully staged, so impossibly rich. But from the very first night, I learned that wealth offers no protection against what sleeps in the sea. The grand hall glittered like a cathedral. Crystal chandeliers shed fractured light across polished marble imported from Italy, their reflections turning every guest into a golden silhouette. That was where the gala ball was held, a gathering of the entire passenger list. I wasn't supposed to be there. I had no business among gowns and tuxedos, but curiosity chained me to a corner. I watched the orchestra swell, the dancers whirl, the laughter spill like bubbles from champagne glasses. That was when I saw her. She was not one of the guests. I knew it instantly. Her dress belonged to another age, yellowed with time, fraying at the seams, lace wilted and stiff with salt. She drifted among the crowd, yet no one turned ahead. No one noticed. No one but me. Her eyes were gray, the dim gray of someone who has stared too long from beneath the surface of the sea. When she paused in the very center of the hall and lifted her gaze toward mine, the music faltered. To everyone else it flowed on, violin singing in perfect rhythm, but to me the notes warped into shrieks, strings bowing impossibilities, rhythm collapsing into sludge. The room thickened, slowed, blurred into unreality. And then she dissolved into light, gone as though she had never existed. On the second night, a passenger vanished. A U.S. senator, last seen dancing with a woman no one could describe. His wife swore she had glimpsed him following a pale figure in white toward the outer deck. He never returned. Whispers of accident, of suicide, fluttered across the ship. But I knew better. The woman of the faded dress had returned, and she had not come alone. I began to dig. In the archives, I found the truth. The Imperial Dawn had not been built from scratch. Its keel, its beams, its bones had been forged partly from salvaged wreckage. Planks and iron torn from a 19th century liner called the Aurora's Grace. That ship had gone down in the same waters we now crossed. Only one survivor crawled from the waves, the captain, who swore his fiancée had drowned during a farewell ball, snatched away as the ocean claimed the vessel. Was it her, then, the drowned bride of that lost ship, wandering through our gleaming halls, searching for a partner for her final waltz? On the third night I saw her again. She glided through the dining room, and this time she was not alone. Around her whirled shadows, figures scarcely visible, their outlines smudged and wavering like smoke. They moved in endless repetition, a toast raised, a bow made, a twirl of a skirt. A phantom banquet played out in parallel to our own feast. The living chewed their food, oblivious. The dead relived their revelry, cold and eternal, at tables set with nothing but dust. The disappearances multiplied. A Hollywood actress, radiant and untouchable. A German banker with his chest full of medals. 2 Filipino maids who carried trays one moment and were gone the next. Each last seen in the company of the woman in white. The captain clamped down on rumors, forbidding whispers lest panic erupt. But fear is a contagion that spreads even in silence. We all felt it, the creeping certainty that our shining ship was no longer ours, but a ballroom slowly being overtaken by ghosts. And then came the night of the grand finale, the last gala. The hall shone brighter than ever, chandeliers blazing like suns. The orchestra surged, couples spun, jewels glimmered, and then, in the midst of that brilliance, she appeared. Her gray eyes cut through the crowd and found mine at once. She extended a hand. No one else noticed. No one else saw. But I felt the cold, radiating from her fingers even across the room, a chill that seeped into my bones. I wanted to resist, to refuse. Yet my body betrayed me. My legs carried me across the floor. My hand rose to meet hers. The instant our skin touched, the world shattered. I was no longer in the Imperial Dawn. I was standing in another hall. The same shape but ruined beyond recognition. The chandeliers were cages of rust. The tables sagged under mats of seaweed. The musicians were skeletons, their bows dragging across strings of rot, coaxing broken wails from violins drowned long ago. And the dancers, oh God, the dancers, were corpses dressed in finery, soaked and stiff, their mouths filled with salt water, their steps circling endlessly in parody of life. At the center she stood, the bride of the sea. Her smile was sweet, tender, and more terrible than death. We danced. I danced with her as the walls groaned like timbers under deep water, as the tide crept higher and higher around my legs. I tried to pull away, but her grip was iron, her strength unbreakable. Around us spun the others, the vanished ones. The senator, the actress, the maids, their faces empty, their eyes dull. their bodies swaying like puppets caught on invisible strings. They were hers now, hers forever. I don't remember the escape. My mind fractured into darkness and cold. When I woke, I was in my bunk, soaked through, strands of seaweed tangled around my shoes. No one believed a word of my story. They laughed, dismissed it as delirium, exhaustion, madness. But the list of the missing grew too long to ignore. By the time we reached port, the names filled pages. The Imperial Dawn never sailed again. The official reason was financial failure, too much bad press, investors pulling out. But I know the truth. The ship is not empty. Its hulls are never still. On calm nights, if you stand on the dock and listen, you can hear faint echoes of violins drifting from her decks. And if you peer through the darkened windows, you may glimpse the shimmer of chandeliers, the swirl of phantom dancers. I was there. I held her hand. I danced with her in that rotting hall. And I know, God help me, I know, that one day she will come for me again. On another ship, in another ballroom, she will claim me once more for the last waltz. If you're enjoying these dark tales and want more, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to Shadows of Fear, and share your thoughts in the comments. Every bit of support helps us keep exploring the unknown together. Come, be part of this community, and don't miss a single story. Now, let's continue. The San Telmo was an old fishing boat, all swollen planks and salt-gnawed timber, with an engine that coughed and grunted like an asthmatic dog. It was not a scientific vessel nor a luxury yacht. Nothing romantic about it. It was a tool for men who lived from one tide to the next, scraping a living out of the sea to feed themselves and pay off debts. I joined the crew in a bitter winter when hunger and need pushed us farther from the usual grounds. Out into waters that do not forgive the careless or the unlucky. The first night offshore, the wind tore at us as if it wanted to peel the skin from our faces. Waves slammed the hull like iron hammers, and the sky was a single, crushing black that only the lightning could tear. Captain Rivas, an old Galician who smelled of tar and tobacco, barked orders over the roar, telling us to hold fast, that once the worst passed, we'd haul nets full and head home heavy with fish. He spoke like a man selling courage cheap. We all knew his promises were thin as paper against the sea. We felt we were riding the lip of a grave, and then we saw it. On the mast, whenever lightning forked across the sky, a blue glow flickered, an unsteady flame that trembled with the gusts. The oldest men on board hailed at once. They called it San Telmo's fire, an electric stigma the old salts whispered about in harbors. Some considered it a blessing, a sign that the saint watched over the vessel. We didn't see mercy in it. We saw an omen, a flare that heralded doom. The storm dragged us deeper. The engine missed and stuttered. The bilge pumps swallowed as much as they could and still lagged behind. As we rolled with the waves, static hissed through the radio, and under that static, we thought at first it was some atmospheric noise. There were voices. Not a distress call, not coordinates or names. They were chants, prayers in a tongue none of us recognized, woven with laughter that sounded as if it rose from the very throat of the sea. The sound seemed to come from below us, from the dark skin of the ocean itself. One of the boys, a skinny kid named Alex, lost his mind. He swore he saw shadows walking on deck, tall, sodden men with coal-bright eyes. Nobody believed him until he began to scream that they were boarding the ship. Then I saw it too, an arm, wet and dark, sliding through a hatch, fingers long and dripping of black, oily water. Captain Rivas slammed the hatch with a curse in Galician, swearing we must not let them in. But they had already come. Perhaps they had never left. We found them in the hold, moving among the stacks of boxes, the crates of fish, or rather, things that had once been men shuffled there. Bloated skin stretched taut over bone, mouths frozen open in wordless howls, eyes white and unfocusing, seeing nothing of the world they passed through. They tottered, water sluiced from them in streams, like men who had just hauled themselves up from some drowning bed. At first they did not strike. They simply surrounded us, a slow, fetid ring, and the ship filled with the stench of swollen corpses. Alex tried to run. He scrambled up to deck, but the storm caught him like a net and he was gone. No cry, no splash that we could locate. One moment he was there, the next the wind and rain swallowed him whole. The sea seemed to accept his life as payment. Rivas, face a ruin of salt and despair, muttered that these were not mere phantoms, but the dead returned, men whose bodies the water returned to collect its tithe, more flesh taken to swell its procession. He spoke of the San Telmo's fleet, of phantom trawlers that circle like vultures, and how, when they appear, a ship does not come back whole. Our nets began to move on their own. Even when we had not cast them, the lines creaked and tightened, as if something beneath was hauling upward. We heard the rope rasping against the blocks, the groan of hemp under strain. When we dared to cut, horror climbed. What surfaced was not fish, but limbs. Arms, twisted and swollen torsos, heads bobbing with mouths that opened and closed. They grabbed for the ladder with hands like seaweed, fingers groping, desperately seeking purchase on anything warm. Every time we hacked at a rope, another length would rise. More hands, more faces, reaching. Our knives were useless. The sea kept supplying more. The boat itself sounded like it was being torn apart. Planks shrieked, seams split, and through the lightning we made out a shape moving far off, a monstrous silhouette afloat against the black. It was a ghost ship, rigged with sails that should not fill in such fierce gale, its decks crowded with hanged men, crew after crew staring in mute rows. They watched us, as if waiting their turn to claim us. Rivas fell to his knees and whispered, more plea than prayer, that it was the San Telmo fleet, that once it shows its face, no one returns. One by one my comrades were taken. Some were dragged screaming into the water by those cold hands that felt like ropes snapping tight around throats. Others simply went slack, seized by fingers that slid under their ribs and pulled until bone and sinew took on the buoyancy of the drowned. Rivas barricaded himself in the wheelhouse, beating at the air with crossed rosaries and muttered invocations, until the sea came and took the cabin, wrenching the door from its hinges and swallowing him. His prayers torn into the rain. All I remember in those last moments was the water rising, the sound softening like a radio fading away, and the belief in my chest like a stone. We had been damned from the very first flash of that blue light. When I woke up, the shore was under my feet. I lay there on the sand for a long time, salt cracking on my lips, the thunder a dim memory as gulls circled above. The rest of the crew, my friends, the men I had shared the watch with, were gone. San Telmo itself was never found. They said fever had made me dream, that the cold and the hunger made monsters of my mind. Maybe some part of me wants to believe that, but sometimes in the thick of a storm, when wind and wave trade blows, and the sky opens like a wound, I hear something that rakes my bones, the creak of old timbers, the slap of wet rope, the chorus of voices calling names into the dark. I close my eyes and I can almost see them, my brothers, standing on that phantom deck, faces swollen and shining, lips moving in prayers I no longer know. And between the thunderclaps, I swear I hear the rhythm of the procession, the slow, inevitable cadence of a fleet that never reaches harbor, waiting to add another name to its roll call of the drowned. If you're enjoying these dark tales and want more, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to Shadows of Fear, and share your thoughts in the comments. Every bit of support helps us keep exploring the unknown together. Come, be part of this community, and don't miss a single story. Now, let's continue. The Northern Star was a Russian icebreaker, a beast of steel stretching more than 100 meters from bow to stern, its hull reinforced to chew through glaciers and force open lanes across seas where only a few dared venture. I had been hired at the last moment as an emergency mechanic, meant to keep engines breathing and pipes from freezing during a scientific expedition into the Arctic. They promised weeks of monotony, tools in hand, lukewarm coffee, and the constant heartbeat of machinery gnawing through ice. But what we lived was not routine. It was a sentence. The first month passed in eerie calm. The ship carved channels between endless white floes, a black wound moving across a frozen desert. Scientists worked their instruments, sampling snow, taking readings of wind and magnetism, while we kept turbines running and valves from choking. The polar night swallowed us. Days and nights blurred into one eternal darkness. Only the ship's lamps cut the black, throwing beams across the ice like knife blades on vast, endless mirror. Sometimes in that stark glow, we thought we saw silhouettes in the distance, giants walking the horizon, too tall, too slow. No one dared speak of them aloud. By the second month, the ice closed its jaws. Pressure ridges rose higher than the bulwarks. Frozen slabs locked around us, and no matter how the engines thundered, the Northern Star could not move. The captain, gray-bearded, proud, stubborn, assured us the freeze would loosen in days, but days bled into weeks, and the prison of ice only hardened. The hull groaned endlessly, the sound like bones splitting beneath the teeth of something invisible. Every few hours a vibration shook through the decks, like a warning growl from the very body of the earth. The first nights trapped were uneasy. We heard knocking on the hull, not just the shifting, cracking roans of ice, but deliberate strikes, rhythmic, measured. Heavy footfalls circling the ship, a sound like something pacing. Some of the Russian sailors crossed themselves and whispered, "Teni Arktiki," the shadows of the Arctic. They claimed figures moved on the ice, watching, waiting. By the fourth week, hell itself had opened. Dr. Karpov, one of the senior scientists, vanished. We found his jacket folded neatly by the deck hatch, as if he had simply undressed and stepped out into the night. No tracks led away from it. Nothing disturbed the snow except a single gouge in the ice, deep as though some enormous weight had pressed down and dragged him beneath. The captain muttered "Neshasny sluchai," an accident. Nobody believed him. That same night, the knocking changed. It came from below us, from beneath the keel, echoing up through the steel floor. Something alive, something vast, was moving in the frozen blackness under our feet. Then more were taken. A cook disappeared after walking into the provisions room. We found the flour sacks torn open, their pale dust spilled across the floor, but stained in places with a strange powdery red, as if someone had sifted blood into the snow. Explanation satisfied us, and from that day the ship smelled different. No longer diesel, sweat, and iron. Instead, a rot of old meat thawing too slowly, a reek that drifted through the vents and clung to our coats. And then we began to see them. No longer shadows at the edge of sight, but shapes, tall, far too tall. They're spindled and stretched, moving with a jerky weight as though their joints had forgotten how to bend. They circled the icebreaker, always keeping to the light's edge. Black silhouettes etched against snow. They left no prints. Sometimes they came close enough to press their long fingers against the hull, dragging them along the plates with a scream of metal that rang down into our bones. The sailors called them Ludilida, the men of ice, but I knew in my marrow these were not men. One night, one of them came inside. I swear it. The main hatch unlocked without a hand touching it. The door swung open, and a wind like knives cut through the corridor. Out of that breath stepped a figure, dark, rimed with frost, water vapor clinging to its skin as though it carried the cold within it. It walked silently down the passage toward the cabins, unhurried, patient, like something confident in its harvest. We found the communications officer in his bunk the next morning, eyes wide, skin pale as carved marble, lungs frozen from the inside out. The captain tried to hold the chain of command, but discipline dissolved. He drank, muttered prayers in Russian, and told us the truth as he saw it, that the ice was alive. that the Arctic itself had chosen us, claimed us as offering. That what prowled outside were no intruders, but guardians, the wardens of a vast and ancient body that had no name. His eyes grew wild. He laughed sometimes when the whole screamed, as if he heard words the rest of us could not. The Northern Star became a mausoleum. Generators failed. Heat died. He huddled under filthy blankets in the engine room, shivering, while footsteps patrolled above us night after endless night. I cannot remember how many of us there had been at the start, only how few we became at the end. 5 ragged survivors, trembling, watching frost crawl across the walls. The captain sat apart, eyes hollow, insisting we must wait. "They will come soon," he rasped, smiling like a child promised a gift. "They are coming to collect us." My memories fracture after that. I recall the tearing groan as the hull split, the ship crying like a wounded beast. I recall figures, too many to count, clambering across the decks, dragging limp bodies into the snow. I remember the scream of one of the last scientists, the woman who saw something none of us did, her mother standing in the blizzard, arms open, waiting for her. She ran to that vision, and the snow folded over her. Then only silence. And me? I ran. I don't know how, or why the cold spared me as long as it did. I fled into the horizonless dark, boots breaking through ice crust, lungs tearing in the freeze, until even my fear froze numb, and the white silence swallowed me. When I opened my eyes again, I lay in a hospital bed in Greenland. Another icebreaker had found me collapsed on the ice weeks later. They found no trace of the Northern Star. Not a shard of hull, not a body. The floe where we had been trapped was smooth, seamless, unbroken, as if no ship had ever existed there at all. They tell me I dreamed, that the cold-bred hallucination, that frostbite filled my brain with phantoms. Perhaps. But when I close my eyes, when the night grows deep and my bones ache with the memory of that cold, I still hear it. The shriek of frozen fingers sliding along steel. The scrape that digs straight through marrow. And in that sound is a promise that one day the ice will remember my name. And when it does, the men of ice will come back for me.